what to play this time. You know what? I got this NES Mini ages ago, and I'm yet to review any of the games available on it. Let's remedy that, shall we? Hello and welcome to Rob's Retro Reviews. Today we're taking a look at Balloon Fight for the NES. This is normally where I would hold up the cartridge for the game before popping it into the console, but this will mark the first time that I've done a review for a game that I don't own physically. Instead, we'll be taking a look at it on the NES Mini because it's one of 30 games that's available on there. Balloon Fight was originally an arcade game which was released in 1984. However, a couple of years later, the NES was released, and because of the success of the arcade version, it was obvious that it would be ported to Nintendo's new home console too. This port later went on to become the most popular version of Balloon Fight, and seems to be the one everyone thinks about when they picture the game. At its core, Balloon Fight is a simple single-screen platformer in which you play as a boy with two balloons attached to his helmet which allows him to fly. Your enemies will also have these balloon helmets though, and because of this, they'll have the exact same flight abilities as you. In order to defeat them, you simply have to pop the balloon and then touch them after they've landed or while they parachute into the ground. You have to do this before they have the chance to blow up another balloon and become active yet again. Enemies that are parachuting down after getting the balloons popped may end up falling into the watery depths or being grabbed by a huge fish, so by getting them in the right position before you pop the balloon, you might not even need to hit them a second time. You may be asking, aren't you going to talk about the story? Well, I would, but there's no story to be found in this game whatsoever. There's no plot details in the manual, there's no cutscenes, so there's literally nothing to talk about in this regard. The main catch with Balloon Fight is that although enemies can be killed quite easily, so can you. One touch from an enemy will result in you losing a balloon, and if you pop your second one, you've lost a 1-up. You can replenish popped balloons by getting to bonus areas which occur every 3 levels, but if you lose a 1-up, there's no way of getting them back. This is the first part of the game that I actually don't like very much. I like it when games reward you in some way for getting to certain score goals, but in Balloon Fight, the score is literally just there for no reason other than to see how high you can get it. There's no getting new lives by reaching a set number of points or anything like that in this game. I also think the balloon system could have been made a bit more rewarding if you could get more than 2 balloons for reaching bonus levels without taking hits. You could end up flying around with 5 balloons, which would give you more health, but also make it easier for enemies to hit you and make it more difficult to fit through small gaps. I think this trade-off would have been an interesting mechanic, but unfortunately, it's kept quite basic by only being allowed 2 balloons at a time. Another way the game could have been kept more interesting is if you could perform combo kills, where you could be awarded with a score multiplier if you kill 2 or more enemies in quick succession, which would have added even more of a tactical element into the game. After getting to stage 12, levels will begin to cycle through the older stages, starting at stage 4, meaning that the game technically never ends, but also meaning that there's actually only 12 unique levels in the whole game, which is quite pathetic when you consider how quickly they can be completed. However, if you're the sort of person who wants to see how high you can get your score, this game will still remain addictive even without a lot of level variety. Wow, I've pretty much done nothing but talk about the negative aspects of this game so far, haven't I? Well, luckily, that's everything negative about the game covered, so now we can move on to what it gets right. First of all, let's talk about these graphics. Yeah, they look very dated, even by NES standards, but remember, this is quite an early release into the NES's lifespan, and it is a port of an older arcade game, so I think we can cut it a bit of slack in this field. Besides, I don't think it looks bad, it's minimal, but at least that means you can always see what's going on and there's nothing fancy to distract you from the gameplay. There is some quite cool attention to detail to be found here too, like how the stars in the background glisten and how there's always at least one cloud in the sky to stop things looking too empty and lifeless. The colours in the levels do change slightly too, which not only signifies the levels are getting harder, but also stops the foreground graphics getting too boring as well. The animation on the boy's arms as he floats is actually pretty good too, so all in all, I would say this game looks quite nice. The gameplay of Balloon Fight is really where it shines though. I've already been through the basics, but there's so many more subtle elements going on in the background that makes this game feel quite special. One aspect of the game I like is how quick it is. Once you press start and see level 1, you literally can't take your eyes off of the screen, because if you do, you'll get ambushed by your enemies and almost certainly lose a 1-up. The reason for this is because there's pretty much no downtime at all. Usually when I play a game, there's a screen transition or a loading screen where I can look away and take a sip of tea or make a note for a review, but with Balloon Fight, this just isn't possible. There's no loading screens, no level transitions, and as soon as you see a stage appear on the screen, you can move towards your enemies, who are temporarily off guard because they have to blow up their balloons at the start of every stage. This means that if you keep your eye on the ball and move fast, you can actually take out 2 or 3 enemies before they've even had the chance to move. However, going into a group of enemies like that could be dangerous because they could potentially spring to life and deal damage to you if you aren't in the right position. The game is full of these risk and reward situations where you have to consider everything happening on the screen before making your move. Another example of this is how you could try getting as many score points as possible by making sure to kill your enemies while they have the parachutes open, which gives you more points than killing them when they're on the floor. And then you could get even more score by grabbing these bubbles that appear after the corpses of your enemies fall into the water. However, to do this you would need to leave at least 1 enemy alive, because killing every enemy will instantly transport you to the next level, making you lose out on getting those bubbles, and this last enemy could kill you while you're messing around trying to get the bubbles. But there's an added danger thrown into the mix because if you spend too long on a level, an electric bolt will be shot out of a cloud in the background and bounce around the stage. If you get hit by this bolt, then you instantly lose a 1-up, regardless of how many balloons you have. So the reward is that by staying in a level for longer, you could potentially get more score, but the risk is that more obstacles are put in your way the longer it takes you to get that score. Some levels even shoot 2 of these bolts of electric out, which further complicates matters. By far Balloon Fight's greatest strength though is that it can be played simultaneously with 2 players, so you can control 2 balloon helmet boys and work together to see how far you can make it into the game without dying. This instantly makes the game more fun, and it can actually get quite tactical. You need to develop some sort of plan for each level so both of you can fly around and defeat as many enemies as possible at the start of every stage. After the enemies start moving though, things can get much more intense than when playing it on single player, and this is because it's actually possible to fly into each other and pop each other's balloons. So if you don't want to end up killing your friend, you need to be communicating at all times. What's interesting about this though is if you pop a friend's balloon, you actually gain score, which indicates to me that as well as being a co-op game, this was intended to be able to be played competitively too. Because of the way the levels are structured though, it really isn't suited to this. What would have been amazing is if there had been a battle mode where there was no enemies and a few varied stages where you could fight each other. There could have been a timer which went down, and upon reaching 0, clouds could have shot out electric bolts to act as a way of making sure matches don't last too long. This would have given the game a lot more content and would have made it a pretty amazing party game too. Speaking of other modes, Balloon Fight does in fact have another mode, and it differs quite a lot from what we've been talking about in the review so far. This mode is called Balloon Trip, and the objective here is to make your way through a constantly scrolling obstacle course, collecting balloons as you go and making sure to avoid the electric bolts. If you touch a bolt, it's an instant game over and you have to start again. The goal is to get to rank 1, and you do this by surviving and collecting balloons to boost your score. The more balloons you get and the longer you survive, the more your rank will go up. At first, the bolts will be completely static, being easy to avoid, but then they'll start slowly moving vertically, then they'll get faster until eventually they start coming at you diagonally too. As the game goes on, there will also be more and more of the bolts to avoid until it becomes a minefield of electric for you to navigate through. So there's a good difficulty curve here, and it's an excellent mode to distract you from the main game. This mode wasn't in the arcade version either, so this technically makes the NES version of Balloon Fight the most complete version of the game. One of the best aspects of the whole game, and the thing that makes it as fun as it is the controls. Whether you're playing the normal mode or Balloon Trip, there's no denying that the controls in this game are phenomenal. Because all of the movement is based on momentum, it might be a bit tricky to initially get used to it, but after playing it a while, you'll be flying around the screen with ease. Basically the way it works is that by tapping A repeatedly, the balloon boy will flap his arms and start to fly. By tapping the button a bit slower, he will hover in place, and by either letting go of the buttons or tapping very slowly, he will fall to the floor. You can move left and right with the D-pad, but the more you hold it, the more you pick up speed and the harder it is to stop. So you may want to only tap a direction for a short time if you want to move slowly, and just let the momentum you've built up carry you forward. For an early NES title, this control scheme is quite complicated, and I'm surprised by how well it works. It feels floaty and like you don't quite have full precise control over your character, but at the same time, you have enough control that it doesn't feel cheap when you get hit or make a mistake. And this loss of control makes sense, seeing as you're moving around by using 2 balloons strapped to your head. I mean, it's not the most accurate form of transportation in the first place. The only other aspect of the game I'm yet to mention is the sound design, and to be honest, there isn't a lot to talk about here. The game really only has one music track, and it plays during the bonus levels and when you play in Balloon Trip. I like the song, it fits the game quite well and it's very catchy. I found myself having it stuck in my head after I stopped playing, which is always a sign that you're doing something right musically. Other than that, there are several jingles and sound effects that play whenever a specific action is taking place on the screen. For example, when an enemy is parachuting to the ground, there's a tune that plays until he hits the floor. When a fish appears, there's a short tune to signal its arrival, and there's different jingles that play when you get a game over or win a bonus round too. Other than that, you have some sound effects for hitting enemies and falling into water, so even when there isn't any music, it doesn't sound too empty. I do find myself wishing that there had been another song that plays during the normal levels though, but I think the reason they didn't do this is probably that they wanted the other jingles and sound effects to be highlighted so you always know what's going on in the level. So if you focus in on one area of the screen, you still know what's going on elsewhere by paying attention to the sound effects. It's a shame they never expanded the formula of this game, because I feel like there's a lot here that could have been developed a little bit more to make a truly amazing game, but unfortunately that never happened, and I doubt it ever will. We did get a sequel in the form of a game called Balloon Kid, which was on the Game Boy, but it wasn't really the same as Balloon Fight and could have pretty much been an entirely unconnected game. More recently, we also got a Balloon Trip minigame in Nintendo Land for the Wii U, which is probably the closest we're ever going to get to a full-on sequel. Interestingly, the Switch's first set of NES games is going to include Balloon Fight along with Dr. Mario and Super Mario Bros. 3, and Nintendo plan on giving it some form of online mode, which is an awesome prospect. Anyway, getting back to the original NES version now, I'm going to give Balloon Fight a 6 out of 10. Despite having quite obvious flaws with not having a story, not being able to gain 1-ups, and being really short, what we have here is a really fun and addictive game which is a blast to play with a friend and that has an extra single player only mode which is just as addicting as the main game. It's not a game where you can play for hours on end, but it is a game where you can easily kill some time and enjoy yourself while doing so. It's simple, but sometimes you don't need to play something complicated to have a good time. Now we just need to wait for Nintendo to release a full-on sequel for the Switch. If you have an NES but don't have Balloon Fight, then I would say you're missing an essential game in your collection. Luckily, it's also on the NES Mini and all of Nintendo's virtual consoles too, so if you've not tried it out, there's no excuse not to. Thanks for watching my review. If you enjoyed it, give it a like, subscribe for more retro reviews coming soon, and leave a comment letting me know what you would like to see in a sequel to Balloon Fight. Let me know what you think to the original game too if you've played it, and until next time, bye!